When this recording comes out, it's probably going to be past Halloween. And who cares about that? Because I really want to talk about Signalis and how it might be one of the most underrated survival horror experiences that I've ever played. I really feel like this is a game that caught me off guard. And by the way, I'm making this video because when I played the game the first time, I actually forgot to click on begin to complete the actual game. I got the ending and was like, well, that was depressing. Well, that made me sad. Did I fail? Like, what the hell was that? Why did it feel so incomplete? And it turns out I'm just a dummy. So I went back and replayed it, and I talked to my buddies about it, and they went, yeah, the game's a trip. It feels like it's I don't know, it feels like this Lovecraftian sci-fi horror that is really rare, because when you're playing through the game, you really have to look at enemies as puzzle pieces. And I really feel like this game has some of the most complex puzzles that I've seen in any survival horror game. There's just so off the wall, like you're getting radio transmissions, you're doing all these different things. And I was not expecting Signalis to be as good as it was. And I feel like there's probably not going to be a game that's going to be like Signalis for a long time, unless the developer comes out with a sequel, which I highly doubt they do because the ending of Signalis is pretty definitive. But I really feel like this title does such an excellent job of making you, the player, feel uncomfortable at all times. You're walking through this empty facility, and you're just kind of figuring out what happened. Why am I here? Who are you trying to save? What do all these people mean to you? What is happening to you? What is happening to the rest of these replicants? Like, it just made you question everything. And as you go through the game, and as you're making your way through the story, you start to kind of question whether or not you're losing your mind, because what this game does is it constantly shifts perspectives from third person to first person, and you're trying to figure out like why it does that. I feel like it's really unique because there were times where I feel like something was going to jump out of the corner and grab me when I was going into first person, but really it was just there to kind of enhance the narrative. I really feel like Signalis is a game that might not cater to a lot of people. I think a lot of people see games like this and they go, well, I'm just going to push it to the side. It does have that retro feel to it. It does have a really old school look to it. It looks like a PS1 game or a PS2 game, however anyone wants to prefer. But the story is just phenomenal. And I really felt like playing through this game, I was like, I've never experienced puzzles this intricate or complex in a survival horror title. Like, you really have to think about what you're doing. And the thing is, when you get to the end game and you're starting to solve that final puzzle, you really have to be on your guard, because if you're not, you actually might lose out on some items that you need. And this is a true survival horror experience, by the way. This is a complete throwback. What makes Signalis difficult, in my opinion, is that you only have 6 slots and you cannot expand those slots at any time. And you have to constantly go through areas. You have to remember where the actual save area is, because if you don't, you're going to find yourself getting very frustrated when you're navigating some of the environments, because there are areas that don't have maps. And I feel like that area in particular was the most frustrating because there is no map. A lot of the rooms look the same. A lot of the layouts can be kind of confusing, especially when you're going through different doors, especially when you're trying to solve some of these puzzles. And that section in particular, I don't think was fun, but the rest of the game was great. There are a number of areas where you're running into rooms and there's just 5 to 6 enemies and they're going to kill you. So it's kind of like, do I ever try to really engage with them? Because when you down an enemy in this game, if you don't light their body on fire with a thermite, it just absolutely means they're going to come back and they're going to just frustrate you the entire time. I remember going through a section, especially in the last part of the game, where I was like, how do you get up so quickly? Because enemies, at first, it would take them quite a while for them to get back up. You have to absolutely be on your guard near the end of the game. And when you're running through some of these puzzle sections, you're kind of running through an area and you're like, I'm probably going to die here if I can't get to this part, because they put like monofilament wire in front of you that can only be seen with a flashlight. And if you actually use your flashlight in an area, it'll alert an enemy. Like, you have to be so cognizant of every action you take in Signalis that I really feel like it's the one survival horror game that, regardless of the difficulty you play on, you better be on your toes. Because if you just think you can shoot at every enemy to try to down them, you're more than likely just wasting resources that you're going to absolutely need when you get to that final boss fight. And that boss fight, to me, was the best one in the game. I really feel like the other boss fights in Signalis were just okay. They do have like some unique twists from like the very first one you fight this really big mining rig. And it's kind of awkward because you're trying to force it to shoot at you, but it also can call ads into the room, which is annoying when a boss in any type of game, regardless of the genre, will call in ads into the room to attack you. But when this happens, they go down fairly easily, but you're waiting for this boss to kind of lower its face shield and then vomit blood. And by the way, that is incredibly grotesque and something that I was not expecting, because you'll notice that the indicator usually is a red X, but then it opens up into that red square so you can do damage. But if you get too close while you're doing damage with the shotgun or the pistol, you are more than likely going to take damage from that blood that's on the ground because it seeps out. And when it starts to spread, it touches you, it does a bunch of damage to you, which was really cool, really unexpected. Kind of frustrating because I didn't know about it, but that's more than likely my fault because I was playing reckless. The other boss fight was kind of weird. It was like this weird block demon, and all you had to do was really just a bunch of damage and get behind a pillar as it charged. It was not really a challenging fight. I just felt like, you probably could have done something more there because there's, I think, only 3 boss fights, but that final fight does make up for the first 2. The final boss fight is unique, and I remember my buddy telling me, when this game tells you to make space in your inventory, you make space. Because if you don't, you more than likely are going to die, and you're going to find that final boss fight to be difficult. And luckily, I was carrying around my strongest weapons. I had my revolver, I had my rifle, and I wanted to carry some explosives with me, but as I was messaging him, he was like, no, don't do that. Just carry around some healing items. You're going to get ammo as you go throughout the fight. And I was like, okay. And as I was making my way in the final fight, I found it really unique because, you down the boss and then you stab him in the face with a spear. And then I was like, oh shit. And you have to do it multiple times. And what's really cool was that as you go through every phase, there's new things happening with the boss. So it becomes like this bullet hell. And I really enjoyed that because this game's movement really didn't feel like it was suited for that type of game. Like bullet hell games, you expect to be able to move and dodge. You cannot really dodge in this game at all. You're just kind of holding down the run button to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. And so you have to be strategic with your shots too, because at some point you're more than likely getting desperate because you're at the end of the boss phase and you're going to want to nail that last shot. I got to that point and I really thought I was going to die because I think I only had like 2 to 3 shots left with my rifle. So I had to really time what I was doing. But I really felt like that boss fight in particular made up for any flaws that I had found with the earlier fights. I really like the fact though that even after I completed that boss fight, that there were multiple endings that I didn't even know about. I got the memory ending, I guess because I played very balanced. And that's generally how I play a lot of survival horror games, but there's also ones where you can be super aggressive and it all affects the way the final, ending works out. And I think there's a true ending as well, but I am not going to work my way through this game to do that again because I think you have to actually collect certain items. And listen, this game frazzled my brain. I played through Signalis. I think it took me 10 hours to beat the game. I know that's probably slow for a lot of people, but there was just some puzzles that really racked my head and I just couldn't figure them out for whatever reason. And I had to take a number of breaks because I was just like, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. But this game to me is one of the most unique survival horror experiences. And I really feel like its only major flaw, honestly, is when you're in that section of nowhere and there's no map and you really have to rely on your memory. And I really feel like it was kind of unfair to not have a map there because that is a massive puzzle. You are collecting, I think, 10 things total. And you have to go through all these different sections. And to unlock certain doors, you have to remember certain items. And even though you have that optic camera, you really don't want to put anything, and this is me just being honest, in your inventory that you're not going to use constantly. And I feel like for myself especially, I really didn't want to use that camera because I was like, look, I really want to be able to defend myself sometimes, because I was running through spots with a pistol and I just kept getting lost. So I kind of had to map out where I was going, how I got to a certain save point. It was just a frustrating affair because for whatever reason, once you complete that section of nowhere, once you get to that final part of the game, you have your map again. So I was kind of confused as to why the developers thought that you could go to one section without a map, and it's the only section of the game without one, and then you can go straight into a section where you can kind of take your time, you can breathe a little bit, even though rooms would just close off after you gathered a tarot card. But it was one of those things where I felt like nowhere kind of killed its own pace because it just refused to have a map. I'm not saying that the section was bad. I found the section to be incredibly intriguing. I was absolutely enamored by the things I was seeing because I really love the fact that the developers took their time to create this really grotesque area. But I really feel like when you don't have a map and you have to rely on either writing something down or some other means to remember, I really feel like it's kind of frustrating to the player because you don't do that anywhere else, and I don't know why you made that decision here. I know that that's a very important part of the game. It's practically the false end, quote unquote, but you doing that is incredibly frustrating because I don't think I've seen any other game just kind of make it difficult to just be difficult. You know, it felt like an unnecessary difficulty spike in a game that was already, you know, limited in regards to your resource usage. So I found it kind of weird, and it's pretty much the only flaw I had in Signalis. Everything else, though, I absolutely loved. To me, I'm really in awe of the level design because this game really reminds me of a Metroidvania. I love the fact of how every area is connected pretty perfectly, and that you can create multiple pathways, especially because if you want to avoid certain enemies, you're going to really want to open up those shortcuts, because there are some areas that are just populous, room to room. There's just a bunch of enemies in there and you really want to save resources. So if you're going through and you're navigating and you want to take your time, you want to explore, what you can do is create some of these shortcuts and your pathing can be perfect. And it just feels really good and you feel accomplished. I really feel like Signalis also nails its sound design. This game is really good, especially when you are going up against enemies and you hear the drums in the background or you hear the techno noises in the background. You're just like, holy shit, am I gonna die? Because when an enemy spots you and they scream and they start charging at you, you really feel like because of how slow your character moves, you're not gonna make it. You really, really have to focus in those moments. It's heart pounding, it's white knuckle, it's great. I love it. I really feel like this game is a real treat for those of us who love horror titles, who love survival horror titles, and who want to be challenged. If you don't want your handheld, play Signalis. I can't recommend this title enough. And unfortunately, it's leaving Game Pass soon. And I really feel like for indie survival horror titles, they really lack discoverability at times because so many of these horror titles come out on Steam, on Epic, on whatever platform, and then they just kind of honestly push the high quality titles to the back, and that sucks. And I really feel like for discoverability purposes, you desperately need this there. You desperately need these streaming services, otherwise you're just not gonna be able to find these games, and that's unfortunate because when Signalis goes away on Game Pass, I really feel like this is just going to be a game that survival horror enthusiasts remember, and I'm hoping that it develops a cult following, but I'm also hoping that the developers create a spiritual successor because there is no chance there's a sequel, right? I mean, this game really has a definitive ending. And by the way, in true horror fashion, there is no happy ending. I don't care what anyone says. If you look at the true ending of this game, and I watched a video of it, and I was like, that's not happy at all. What are you talking about? So I really feel like if we're going to get a Signalis 2, which doubtful, But I do feel like the developer, if they work on a spiritual successor or a similar title like Signalis, I'm all for it, because this game was fantastic. And listen, I'm a fan, and I hope that the next title they release is something close or better than this. Hopefully they remember not to just create an unnecessary difficulty spike just to spite the player. I'm just saying. And that is going to do it for this video. If you happen to like the content, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. If you played Signalis, give me your thoughts on this title. I desperately want to know what you think about it. And let me know if you think there is a happy ending, because I will debate you to death about it. Because I really don't think that there's a happy ending in this game. And I know someone's going to be like, well, in the context of the things that are happening, I guess. But listen, this game is amazing. Please go ahead and play Signalis now. I am Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.